"Excuse me, is this yours?" Sarah Bennett's voice was soft, almost swallowed by the cold October wind drifting across Boston Common. But the man she was speaking to reacted as if she had shouted. He stopped walking instantly. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he simply stared at the object resting in her open palm. A gold ring. Old-fashioned. Elegant. The kind of ring that didn't belong in the dirt beneath a park bench. The kind of ring that looked like it carried a story. Around them, the city moved on without noticing. Joggers passed along the winding paths. Yellow leaves skittered across the pavement. A distant siren echoed between buildings. But neither Sarah nor the stranger seemed to hear any of it. His eyes remained fixed on the ring. Sarah shifted her weight, suddenly unsure of herself. She had found it less than 10 minutes earlier while helping her daughter tie a loose shoelace near the duck pond. At first, she thought it was costume jewelry. Then she picked it up. It felt heavier than expected. Real. Important. The stranger finally reached toward it, but his hand trembled before his fingers touched the gold band. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly. His voice carried the calm confidence of someone used to being listened to. Yet there was something else underneath it now. Something fragile. Sarah pointed toward a nearby bench. "Under there." "I almost didn't see it." The man exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding his breath for hours. "I've been looking everywhere." Sarah offered a small smile and placed the ring into his hand. "Well, then I guess today's your lucky day." The stranger looked down at the ring again. The morning sunlight caught the gold surface, making it glow. For a second, his expression softened into something unexpectedly emotional. Not relief. Something deeper. Almost grief. Sarah noticed the expensive navy overcoat, the polished shoes, the watch that probably cost more than her annual rent. He didn't look like someone who lost control of his emotions. Yet standing there beside the pond, he seemed completely undone by a simple ring. "Thank you," he said. "You have no idea what this means to me." Sarah shrugged lightly. "It belongs to you. That's all that matters." His eyes lifted to meet hers. "Most people would have sold it." Sarah laughed softly. "Most people don't have a 6-year-old watching everything they do." The stranger glanced toward Lily. The little girl sat nearby feeding crumbs to a cluster of fearless pigeons. Her blonde ponytail bounced every time she laughed. "Your daughter?" he asked. "Yep." Sarah smiled. "My whole world." Lily waved at the man enthusiastically. He gave a small wave back before looking at Sarah again. "At least let me reward you." Sarah shook her head immediately. "No, please. Really, it's okay." The stranger frowned slightly, clearly unaccustomed to hearing that word. "You don't even know who I am." "Do I need to?" Sarah asked. "Not if you're giving lost property back." For the first time, a genuine smile appeared on his face. It transformed him, made him look younger, less guarded. "Fair point." Sarah adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag. The fabric had faded from years of use. One of the seams had been repaired twice already. "Well," she said, "I'm glad you found what you were looking for." She turned toward Lily. "Come on, sweetheart. We need to get going." Lily hopped off the bench and ran toward her mother. The stranger watched them for a moment before speaking again. "Wait." Sarah looked back. "At least tell me your name." "Sarah." "Sarah what?" "Sarah Bennett." He nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. "I'm Alexander Hayes." Sarah blinked. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Then it clicked. Alexander Hayes. The billionaire founder of Hayes Capital. His face appeared on magazine covers and business news segments almost weekly. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Oh." Alexander noticed her reaction, but didn't seem surprised. "Now you know who I am." Sarah glanced at the ring resting in his hand. "Honestly, Mr. Hayes, it wouldn't have changed anything." Something unreadable crossed his face. Before he could reply, Lily tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mom." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand and started walking away. Behind them, Alexander remained standing beside the pond, watching, thinking. The gold ring felt warm in his palm. For 6 years, he had believed the message engraved inside that ring represented a future that never happened. A future that had disappeared without explanation. Yet now, after all this time, the ring had somehow returned to him through a struggling single mother who had every reason to keep it and no reason to give it back. As Sarah and Lily disappeared into the crowd, Alexander slowly turned the ring over. His thumb brushed the inscription hidden inside. For simple words. For words that instantly brought back memories he had spent years trying to bury. "For our daughter." And for the first time in a very long time, Alexander Hayes began to wonder whether the past was truly finished with him. Alexander remained beside the pond long after Sarah and Lily disappeared from view. The sounds of the city slowly returned around him, but his attention never left the ring resting in his palm. The gold surface reflected the pale afternoon sunlight. 6 years. 6 years since he had last seen it. 6 years since Emily Carter had walked out of his life, carrying more questions than answers. He closed his hand around the ring and headed toward the black SUV waiting at the curb. By the time he reached Hayes Capital headquarters, the sky above Boston had turned gray. The 60-story glass tower reflected the clouds like a mirror. Employees greeted him as he crossed the lobby. Executives stepped aside. Assistants hurried to keep pace. Normally, Alexander noticed everything. Today, he noticed nothing. His chief of staff, Rebecca Morgan, followed him into the private elevator. "The board meeting starts in 15 minutes, she said. "The Chicago acquisition documents are ready for review." Alexander nodded absently. Rebecca studied him. After nearly 10 years working together, she could read his moods better than most people. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Alexander looked down at the ring. "Have you ever spent years convincing yourself that a chapter of your life was over?" Rebecca blinked. "That sounds unusually philosophical for a Monday afternoon." He offered a faint smile. "Maybe it is." When the elevator doors opened, he walked directly to his office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Boston skyline. Boats moved across the harbor in the distance. Normally, the view helped him think. Not today. He sat behind his desk and carefully placed the ring on the polished wood surface. His eyes drifted toward the inscription hidden inside. "For words. For our daughter." The memory arrived instantly. Emily laughing as ocean waves rolled onto a Cape Cod beach. The summer wind lifting her hair. The tiny velvet box in his hand. The plans they had made. The future they had imagined. A future that vanished 3 months later when Emily disappeared without explanation. Alexander had searched for answers. For months. Then years. Eventually, there had been nothing left to search for. Or so he thought. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Rebecca stepped inside carrying a tablet. "The board is waiting." Alexander glanced at the conference room visible through the glass wall. 12 executives sat around a table discussing numbers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. None of it felt important. "Reschedule." Rebecca stared at him. "The entire board?" "Yes." "Alexander, some of them flew across the country for this meeting." He stood and picked up the ring. "Then they can fly back tomorrow." Rebecca had seen him negotiate billion-dollar mergers without hesitation. She had watched him remain calm during market crashes. Yet whatever had happened today was affecting him more than any business crisis ever had. "Who returned that ring?" she asked quietly. Alexander stopped. "What makes you think someone returned it?" "Because I have never seen that look on your face before." For a moment, he considered saying nothing. Then he remembered Sarah refusing a reward she probably needed. He remembered the worn bag hanging from her shoulder and the repaired seams along the fabric. Most of all, he remembered her daughter. The bright smile. The carefree wave. Something about the child lingered in his mind. "A single mother found it," he said. "She gave it back without asking for anything." Rebecca nodded slowly. "People like that still exist." Alexander looked out toward the harbor. Apparently they do. Hours later, after the building had emptied, he sat alone in the darkness of his office. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. His phone rested beside the ring. He had already asked his security team for a routine report. Nothing invasive. Just public information. Something he could justify. Yet when the email finally arrived, he hesitated before opening it. His instincts told him this should have been the end of the story. A kind woman returned a lost ring. Life moved on. But deep down, something felt unfinished. Alexander opened the report. A photograph appeared on the screen. Sarah Bennett stood outside a small apartment building holding grocery bags in one hand and Lily's hand in the other. Alexander's eyes shifted to the child. Then they froze. Around Lily's neck hung a small silver pendant. A pendant shaped like a flower. The exact same flower engraved on the inside of the ring. Alexander stared at the photograph for so long that the screen eventually dimmed. He tapped it awake again and leaned closer. The silver pendant hanging around Lily's neck was small, barely visible in the image, but he recognized the design immediately. The flower had 6 petals arranged around a tiny star. It was not a common pattern. It had been created by a private jeweler in Cape Cod years ago. The same jeweler who had crafted the ring. The same jeweler Emily had insisted on using because she wanted everything to feel personal. Alexander sat back slowly. Coincidences happened every day. Yet this no longer felt like a coincidence. The next morning, Boston woke beneath a blanket of low clouds. Rain tapped softly against apartment windows across the city. Sarah Bennett stood in her small kitchen pouring cereal into a bowl, while Lily sat at the table coloring a picture of a golden retriever she hoped to own someday. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon toast. It was not much, but it was home. Sarah checked the clock. Her shift at the cafe started in 45 minutes. Another busy day. Another stack of bills waiting on the counter. Another month of carefully stretching every dollar. Still, she smiled when Lily held up her drawing. "Look, Mom, I gave him blue eyes." Sarah laughed. "I have never seen a dog with blue eyes. Maybe he is special." Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Maybe he is." Across the city, Alexander sat inside a private conference room. The table was covered with documents, but none of them had his attention. Instead, he slid an old photograph from a folder. The picture had been taken nearly 7 years earlier. Emily stood beside the ocean, smiling into the camera. Around her neck hung the same flower pendant. Alexander felt a chill run through him. He picked up his phone. "Rebecca." "Yes." "I need information about a jeweler named Michael Grayson. Cape Cod." There was a pause. "The jeweler who made the ring?" "Yes." "I thought he retired." "Find out anyway." 2 hours later, Rebecca stepped into his office carrying a thin file. "You were right," she said. "He retired 5 years ago. Lives in Provincetown now." Alexander took the folder. "Set up a meeting." "Today." "Today." By mid-afternoon, Alexander's helicopter landed near the coast. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs. Gray waves rolled beneath a cold autumn sky. Michael Grayson turned out to be a thin man in his 70s with silver hair and sharp eyes. He welcomed Alexander into a workshop filled with sketches and unfinished jewelry pieces. "I have not seen you in years," Michael said. "I was surprised when you called." Alexander placed the ring on the workbench. "I need to ask about this." Michael picked it up carefully. His expression softened. "I remember making it." "Do you remember the pendant?" Alexander asked. "The flower design." Michael smiled. "Of course." He walked toward a cabinet and opened a drawer filled with old records. After several minutes, he pulled out a faded folder. "I keep copies of custom orders." Alexander's pulse quickened. Michael opened the folder. Inside were sketches. The ring. The pendant. Matching designs. Then Alexander noticed something else. There were not 2 pieces. There were 3. His eyes narrowed. "What is that?" Michael adjusted his glasses. "The 3rd piece." He pointed toward a tiny bracelet design bearing the same flower symbol. That was commissioned at the same time. Alexander stared at the drawing. The bracelet was clearly designed for a child. "A child?" he asked quietly. Michael nodded. "That is what Emily told me. She said all 3 pieces belonged together." Alexander felt his heartbeat quicken. What exactly did she say? The old jeweler thought for a moment. Then his expression became serious. "She said she wanted something her daughter could wear one day." The workshop suddenly felt smaller. The distant sound of waves crashing against the shoreline faded into the background as Alexander stared at the sketch on the workbench. A bracelet. A child's bracelet. Designed years before Emily disappeared. His throat tightened. Michael carefully closed the folder and looked at him with concern. "You did not know?" he asked gently. Alexander shook his head. "No," the old jeweler exhaled slowly. "I assumed you did." Emily seemed so excited when she came here. She talked about the future the entire afternoon. Alexander looked away. Through the workshop window, gray clouds drifted above the Atlantic. Future. That word felt almost cruel now. Years ago, he and Emily had spent countless evenings talking about their future. A house near the water. Family vacations. Children running across a backyard filled with summer sunlight. Dreams that had seemed certain. Real. Permanent. Then one day she was gone. Did she ever mention a child? Alexander asked. Michael thought for a moment. Not directly, but she talked about becoming a mother someday. She said she wanted to leave something meaningful behind. Alexander's gaze returned to the bracelet sketch. The flower symbol matched the pendant. The pendant matched the ring. Every answer seemed to create 2 new questions. An hour later, he sat alone inside the helicopter as it crossed the Massachusetts coastline. Rebecca had already sent him additional information. Public records. Addresses, dates, timelines. He opened the file on his tablet. Emily Carter had disappeared 6 years ago. Officially, she relocated without leaving a forwarding address. There were no criminal investigations, no unusual reports, nothing that explained why she had cut all contact. Alexander scrolled through the documents. Then he stopped. One date caught his attention immediately. His heartbeat quickened. Emily had visited Boston General Hospital less than 8 months after leaving. The visit had occurred nearly 6 years ago, around the same time Lily would have been born. Alexander stared at the screen. A coincidence. Another coincidence. Yet the list of coincidences was growing too long. By the time he returned to Boston, evening shadows stretched across the city streets. Office lights glowed inside skyscrapers. Traffic crawled through downtown intersections. Instead of heading home, Alexander instructed his driver to stop near Sarah's neighborhood. The apartment building looked older than it had in the photograph. Brick walls weathered by decades of New England winters. Narrow balconies. Flickering hallway lights. Nothing about it resembled the world he lived in. Across the street, a small grocery store remained open. Parents hurried in and out carrying bags. Children laughed near a bus stop. Ordinary lives unfolding unnoticed. Alexander remained inside the vehicle. He had no intention of approaching Sarah. Not yet. Something felt unfinished. Unclear. He needed facts before questions. As he watched the apartment entrance, a familiar figure appeared. Sarah emerged carrying 2 grocery bags. Lily skipped beside her, wearing a bright yellow raincoat despite the clear sky. Alexander found himself smiling unexpectedly. The little girl seemed incapable of walking normally. Every movement was a hop, a skip, or a spin. Then something happened. Lily stopped suddenly near the sidewalk. An elderly man had dropped a paper shopping bag. Apples rolled across the pavement. Without hesitation, Lily released her mother's hand and ran to help. Sarah immediately joined her. Together they gathered every apple and returned them to the grateful stranger. The entire interaction lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet Alexander could not stop watching. Sarah never noticed the black SUV parked across the street. She simply smiled, wished the man a good evening, and continued home. The scene reminded Alexander of something Rebecca had said. People like that still exist. He looked toward the apartment entrance as Sarah and Lily disappeared inside. Then his eyes drifted upward. For a brief second, Lily appeared at a third-floor window. She pressed her hands against the glass and looked out at the city lights. The silver flower pendant rested against her jacket collar, catching the glow from a nearby street lamp. Alexander felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. The same symbol, the same age, the same unanswered questions. And for the first time, a possibility entered his mind that he was almost afraid to consider. What if Emily had not disappeared alone? The question followed Alexander everywhere over the next several days. It lingered during board meetings. It sat beside him during late-night conference calls. It waited in the silence of his penthouse overlooking the harbor. What if Emily had not disappeared alone? He hated how quickly the possibility had rooted itself in his mind. Because if it were true, then everything he believed about the last 6 years might be wrong. On Thursday morning, rain drummed softly against the windows of Hayes Capital. Alexander stood beside his desk staring at another file Rebecca had delivered. This one contained records from Boston General Hospital. Nothing private, nothing confidential. Only publicly accessible information and archived references connected to Emily's final known activities. Most of it led nowhere. Then one line stopped him. Volunteer contact listed, Sarah Bennett. Alexander read it twice. Then a third time. His pulse quickened. Sarah's name appeared on a hospital volunteer registry from 6 years ago. The same year Emily vanished. The same year Lily was born. Rebecca entered carrying coffee. She immediately noticed his expression. You found something. Alexander handed her the file. She scanned the page. Sarah Bennett. Their names appear in the same hospital records. Rebecca looked thoughtful. That does not necessarily mean they knew each other. No, Alexander nodded. But it means they crossed paths. Across town, Sarah balanced a tray of coffee cups through the crowded cafe. Morning customers filled nearly every table. The smell of fresh pastries mixed with the steady hum of conversation. She had worked there for 4 years. Long enough to memorize regular orders. Long enough to smile through exhaustion. Long enough to hide how worried she felt whenever unexpected expenses appeared. Her manager approached. Sarah, Table 7 asked for you. She glanced toward the corner booth. An older woman sat alone beside the window. Gray hair, kind eyes, familiar somehow. Sarah frowned slightly before walking over. The woman stood the moment she arrived. Sarah Bennett. Yes. The woman smiled warmly. You probably do not remember me. Sarah studied her face. Then recognition slowly appeared. Nurse Helen. The woman laughed softly. I was hoping you would. Memories surfaced instantly. Hospital hallways. Late nights. Endless cups of vending machine coffee. 6 years earlier, Sarah had spent weeks visiting Boston General after her mother underwent treatment there. During that difficult period, Nurse Helen had often checked on them. It has been years, Sarah said. How have you been? Retired, Helen replied. Finally. They shared a laugh. Then Helen's smile softened. I heard about your mother. I was very sorry. Sarah nodded. Even after all these years, speaking about her mother still hurt. Thank you. Helen hesitated. And how is Lily? Sarah blinked. You remember Lily? Of course I do. Helen's eyes drifted toward the small pendant visible around Sarah's neck. The same flower pendant Lily wore every day. Some things are hard to forget. Before Sarah could ask what she meant, another customer called for assistance. By the time she looked back, Helen was gathering her purse. I should go, the retired nurse said. It was wonderful seeing you again. Wait. Sarah smiled. Let me at least buy your coffee. Helen reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You already paid me back years ago. Then she left. Sarah stood frozen beside the booth. The comment felt strangely significant. Yet before she could think more about it, the lunch rush swept her back into work. Later that evening, Alexander received an unexpected phone call. Mr. Hayes, a frail voice asked. This is Helen Whitaker. Alexander sat upright. The former nurse? Yes. How did you get this number? Helen chuckled. Retirement gives people time to be resourceful. Alexander smiled despite himself. What can I do for you? Silence filled the line for several seconds. Then Helen spoke quietly. I believe you are looking for answers about Emily Carter. Every muscle in Alexander's body tightened. What do you know? Not everything, Helen admitted. But I know enough to tell you one thing. Alexander gripped the phone. Outside his window, city lights flickered across the harbor. What is it? Helen's voice softened. Sarah Bennett did not find her way into this story by accident. Alexander did not sleep that night. After ending the call with Helen Whitaker, he remained seated beside the window for hours, watching the harbor lights shimmer across the dark water. Sarah Bennett did not find her way into this story by accident. The sentence repeated endlessly in his mind. By sunrise, he was already driving across the city. Helen had agreed to meet him at a small waterfront diner south of Boston, the kind of place tourists rarely noticed and locals never abandoned. The smell of coffee and fresh biscuits filled the air as Alexander entered. Helen sat in a corner booth overlooking the bay. She looked older than he remembered, but her eyes remained sharp. Thank you for coming, Alexander said. Helen gestured toward the empty seat across from her. You deserve answers. Alexander sat down immediately. Then tell me what happened. Helen wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. For several moments, she simply stared out the window. 6 years ago, Emily arrived at Boston General alone. She began quietly. She was frightened, exhausted, and determined to stay hidden. Alexander felt his chest tighten. Hidden from who? Helen looked directly at him. That is the strange part. She never said. The waitress delivered coffee, but neither of them touched it. Helen continued. Emily spoke about you often. Alexander blinked in surprise. She did. Every day. Helen smiled faintly. She carried your photograph inside her wallet. A painful silence followed. For years Alexander had convinced himself Emily left because she no longer loved him. Hearing otherwise reopened wounds he thought had healed long ago. Then why did she disappear? He asked. Helen shook her head. I do not know. She reached into her purse and removed an old envelope. The edges were worn with age. But I know she trusted someone. Alexander stared at the envelope. Sarah. Helen nodded. The two of them met in the hospital. Memories seemed to return to the retired nurse as she spoke. Sarah was visiting her mother almost every evening. Emily noticed her helping other patients, bringing flowers, reading books to people who had no visitors. They became friends. Alexander listened carefully. Every detail mattered now. How close were they? Helen smiled. Close enough that Emily asked Sarah for a favor. Alexander felt his pulse quicken. Helen slid the envelope across the table. A few days before Emily left the hospital, she gave me this. She said if anything ever happened, I should hold on to it until the right time. Alexander carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. The image had faded slightly over the years. Emily stood beside Sarah in a hospital corridor. Both women were smiling. And in Emily's arms was a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. Alexander stopped breathing for a moment, his eyes fixed on the tiny face. "Lily," he whispered. Helen nodded slowly. "Yes." The diner's background noise seemed to disappear. The clatter of dishes, the conversations, the distant seagulls outside. Everything faded. Alexander could only stare at the photograph. Emily, Sarah, Lily, together. Sarah knew her, he said quietly. More than that, Helen replied. She helped her. Alexander lifted his eyes. How? Helen's expression softened. Emily became very sick after Lily was born. Not permanently, but enough that she needed support. Sarah stepped in when nobody else could. Alexander looked back at the photograph. Something about Sarah's smile felt familiar now. Not because he had met her in the park, because it reflected the same kindness he had witnessed helping strangers, returning lost rings, and teaching Lily to do the same. There is something else, Helen said. Alexander looked up. What? Helen hesitated. The day Emily left the hospital, she told me one thing I never forgot. Alexander leaned forward. What did she say? Helen's eyes glistened slightly. She said if she could not be there one day, she trusted Sarah Bennett with the most important person in her world. Alexander left the diner carrying the photograph as carefully as if it were made of glass. The afternoon sun hung low over the harbor, casting golden reflections across the water, but he barely noticed. His mind remained fixed on the image of Emily holding a newborn child while standing beside Sarah Bennett. For years he had searched for explanations. Now the answers were beginning to surface, and somehow they raised even more questions than before. Back at Hayes Capital, Rebecca found him standing in front of the office windows staring at the photograph again. She closed the door quietly behind her. You found something important. Alexander handed her the picture. Rebecca studied it for several seconds. Her eyes widened. That is Lily. Yes. And Sarah knew Emily. Alexander nodded. Long before I ever met her. Rebecca returned the photograph. What are you going to do? Alexander looked toward the city below. Thousands of people moved through streets and sidewalks, each carrying lives invisible to everyone else. I need the truth. That evening, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table helping Lily with a school project. Colored paper, glue sticks, and markers covered nearly every inch of the surface. Lily held up a drawing proudly. It is our family tree. Sarah smiled. Let me see. Lily pointed at the page. That is you. Then another branch. That is Grandma. Sarah's smile softened. Her mother had been gone for years now, but Lily still spoke about her often. Then the little girl pointed toward an empty space near the top of the page. I never know what to put here. Sarah followed her finger. The space labeled Father. Her chest tightened slightly. It was not the first time the question had appeared. Lily was old enough to notice other families. Old enough to wonder. You do not have to fill every space, Sarah said gently. Lily considered that answer. Okay. Then she smiled again and returned to her markers. Yet long after Lily went to bed, Sarah remained at the table staring at the unfinished family tree. Across town, Alexander sat inside a private archive room located beneath Hayes Capital headquarters. Decades of company records filled shelves stretching from floor to ceiling. Most people never entered the room. Tonight, he was searching through something far more personal. Old storage boxes, photographs, letters, anything connected to Emily. Hours passed. Dust floated through narrow beams of light. Then he found it. A small leather journal. Emily's handwriting covered every page. Alexander carefully opened it. Some entries described ordinary days. Coffee shops, beach walks, future plans. Others were more emotional. Reflections, hopes, fears. Then one sentence made him stop. He read it twice. Emily had written, if anything ever happens to me, Sarah promised Lily would always know she was loved. Alexander stared at the page. Sarah promised Lily. Not a stranger. Not a casual acquaintance. Someone Emily trusted completely. His heart pounded as he turned another page. A folded note slipped free and landed on the desk. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was Emily's. The date was 6 years old. Alexander read every word. By the time he finished, his hands were shaking. The note revealed one undeniable truth. Emily had never intended to disappear forever. She had planned to contact him. She had planned to tell him everything. But for reasons she never explained, that message had never been delivered. Alexander closed his eyes. 6 years. 6 years believing he had been abandoned. 6 years not knowing a child existed somewhere in the world. When he opened his eyes again, his decision was already made. The next morning, as Sarah walked Lily toward school beneath a crisp blue sky, a black SUV slowly pulled to the curb nearby. The rear door opened. Alexander stepped out. Sarah stopped immediately. Surprise crossed her face. Lily looked between them curiously. Alexander took a slow breath. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely nervous. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I think we need to talk about Emily." Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. For a moment, the sounds of the city disappeared. Children laughing near the school entrance. Car doors closing. Parents saying goodbye. Everything faded into the background. Only one word remained. Emily. Lily looked up curiously. "Mom." Sarah forced a smile. "Go ahead, sweetheart. You do not want to be late." Lily hugged her quickly before running toward the school entrance. The silver pendant bounced gently against her jacket as she disappeared inside. Alexander watched her go. Sarah noticed the look in his eyes. It was not curiosity anymore. It was recognition. Fear tightened in her chest. "How much do you know?" she asked quietly. Alexander hesitated. "Enough to know Emily trusted you." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. 6 years of carefully guarded memories suddenly felt very fragile. This is not a conversation we should have on a sidewalk. An hour later they sat across from each other in a quiet corner of a waterfront cafe. The morning crowd had thinned. Sunlight reflected off the harbor beyond the windows. Sarah wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee she had barely touched. Alexander placed Emily's photograph on the table. Sarah stared at it. A sad smile appeared immediately. "I have not seen this picture in years." "You kept in touch with her?" Alexander asked. Sarah looked down. For a while, silence settled between them. Finally, she took a slow breath. "Emily arrived at the hospital alone. She was scared, but she never stopped talking about you." Alexander looked away toward the water. Hearing those words hurt more than he expected. "Then why did she leave?" Sarah's expression softened. "Because she thought she was protecting someone." Alexander frowned. "Protecting who?" "You." The answer stunned him. Sarah continued. "I never knew every detail. Emily rarely talked about the reasons. But she believed certain people were trying to gain access to your company through her family. She thought staying away would keep problems from reaching you." Alexander sat back slowly. The explanation sounded unbelievable. Yet Emily had always placed other people before herself. It was exactly the kind of sacrifice she would make. Sarah reached into her purse and removed a worn envelope. "I think it is time you saw this." Alexander carefully accepted it. The paper had yellowed with age. Emily's handwriting covered the front. His name. Nothing else. His heart pounded as he opened it. Inside was a letter. The first sentence alone nearly stole his breath. "If you are reading this, then somehow life found a way to bring our story back together." Alexander continued reading. Emily wrote about Lily. About becoming a mother. About wanting to tell him everything once the situation was safe. She wrote about every birthday she imagined he would celebrate with their daughter one day. Every memory she hoped they would share. Every dream she never stopped carrying. By the time he reached the final page, his vision had blurred. Sarah remained silent, giving him time. Finally he looked up. "Why did you never contact me?" Sarah's eyes filled with emotion. "I tried." Alexander blinked. "What? Twice?" Sarah looked down at her hands. The first letter came back unopened. The second time, your office said you were overseas for months. Alexander stared at her. Years of assumptions began crumbling apart. Sarah continued softly. "After Emily passed away, I became Lily's legal guardian. Emily asked me to raise her if anything happened. I promised I would." The cafe grew quiet around them. Alexander looked through the window toward the harbor. Then back at Sarah. Then toward the school several blocks away, where Lily sat completely unaware that her life was about to change forever. "Does Lily know?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "She only knows Emily was her mother." Alexander's voice barely rose above a whisper. "And she does not know I am her father?" Sarah met his eyes. "No, but sooner or later, she deserves the truth." The truth did not come all at once. It arrived slowly, carefully, over the following weeks. Sarah insisted that Lily deserved honesty, but she also deserved kindness. There would be no dramatic revelations, no confusion, no pressure, only patience. Alexander agreed. For the first time in his life, he understood that some things could not be solved with money, influence, or urgency. They could only be earned. The first meeting happened on a bright Saturday afternoon at Boston Common, the same park where everything had begun. Lily sat on a blanket feeding pieces of a sandwich to a flock of determined pigeons while Sarah watched from nearby. Alexander arrived carrying a small paper bag from a bakery. He looked more nervous than he had during any business negotiation in his career. Lily noticed immediately. "You are the ring guy," she said. Alexander laughed softly. "I guess I am. Mom says you are important." Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. Alexander smiled. "Your mom is very generous." Lily studied him for a moment. "You do not look important." "What does important look like?" Alexander asked. Lily considered the question seriously. "Taller." Sarah burst out laughing. Even Alexander could not stop himself from smiling. The ice broke. Conversations became easier after that. One meeting turned into another, then another. Alexander learned that Lily loved drawing animals, hated broccoli, and believed every dog deserved its own birthday party. Lily learned that Alexander could not draw at all, always ordered the same coffee, and secretly carried dog treats in his coat pocket because he never knew when he might meet a friendly golden retriever. Little by little, trust formed. Not because anyone forced it, because it grew naturally. One evening, nearly 2 months later, Sarah stood in her apartment kitchen watching Lily finish homework while Alexander helped with a difficult math problem. The scene felt strangely peaceful. Familiar, even though it was entirely new. Her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder appeared. Emily's birthday. Sarah's smile faded. Alexander noticed immediately. "What is wrong?" Sarah showed him the screen. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lily looked up. "Was she nice?" Sarah blinked. "Who?" "My mom." The room became quiet. Sarah walked over and sat beside her. She was wonderful. Alexander knelt beside them. She was brave, too. Lily looked between them. "I wish I remembered her." Sarah wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "She loved you very much." Alexander felt emotion tighten his chest. More than anything. Lily nodded thoughtfully. Then she asked the question both adults had known was coming eventually. "Is there anything else I should know?" Sarah and Alexander exchanged a glance. Months earlier, the moment would have filled them with fear. Now it felt different. Ready, gentle, honest. Alexander reached into his pocket and removed the gold ring. The ring that had started everything. The ring Emily had once treasured. The ring Sarah had returned without knowing its history. Lily stared at it curiously. Alexander turned it over and showed her the inscription inside. For simple words. "For our daughter." Lily read them quietly, then looked up. Understanding slowly appeared in her eyes. Tears formed, but they were not tears of sadness. They were the tears that come when a missing piece finally finds its place. Several months later, on a warm spring afternoon, 3 figures stood beside the harbor watching sailboats drift across the water. Lily wore the flower pendant around her neck. Sarah stood beside her. Alexander stood nearby. No one spoke for a while. The breeze carried the scent of salt water through the air. Finally, Lily looked up at them both. "Do you think Mom knew this would happen?" Sarah smiled softly. Alexander gazed toward the horizon where sunlight danced across the waves. "Maybe not exactly like this." Lily considered that answer. "Then how?" Alexander looked down at the ring resting in his hand before placing it gently into Lily's palm. "I think she believed that kindness always finds its way home."